Hello and welcome back to the Gentleman Psychic. Hello, everybody. Good to have everyone here. I know that it's early yet, and some of you have not quite gotten on, so I'm going to stick around for just a second, and then I have to go grab something, and I will be right back. But we will be reading The Sorrows of Satan, which I don't know why I showed you the book. You know what it is. Anyway, I'll be right back. I promise I won't be gone for very long. Unless there's a ghost. Maybe there might be. I don't know. Anyway, I'll be right back. Oh, actually, I just looked down at the time and I thought I was running really, really late. And my clock in here is a little fast. It's about 7 minutes fast. So I heard it chime 10 and I was slightly panicked. And then I forgot this handy dandy thing that we are so addicted to these modern days that I went, oh, I have to go find it. I don't know if I left it in the kitchen or if I didn't know where. I left it in my front room where I had just finished up a class on money magic, which that was fun. I rather enjoyed that class. I'm just going to let a few people come on and join. Say hello if you're here. We've got 3 people so far. Hello, hello, hello. We are going through The Sorrows of Satan. It is a brilliant book. I believe it is 1895 when it was written, late 1890s. Our hero, if you want to call him that, has just encountered Prince Lucio, and perhaps he's made a deal with the devil. Oh, this, by the way. Oh, hi there, Axton. Good to see you, Axton Valenwood. I have a little bit of tinnitus tonight, so I put this in here to sort of act as a buffer because otherwise it's slightly disconcerting. It still is slightly disconcerting, but at least it's slightly better. Oh, wonderful things. What can we talk about while we're waiting? We've got Mother's Day coming up. I still have to get a video up for that. I still have been promising you this video of my chair redo for a while now. I haven't gotten a chance to actually upload that, but when things settle down here, I will be doing more of my magic videos. My boys will be back. You remember my friend the devil, Asmodeus, Scratch, and now introducing Belial. What's a man without his lovely band of demons? That's what I have to say. So we've got just a few people. Oh, you know why we only have a few people? Because I forgot to do this. I forgot to go right over here. I have to modern technology. That was why I was needing this thing. I forgot why. And your channel, I'm going to go right over here. I am live now. I have to go here and share it. Share. We will go copy. And we're going to go right over here to the Gentleman Facebook page. The Gentleman Psychic, rather, for those who are keeping track. The Gentleman Psychic. We'll go right over here, create post, watch me live. And we will put the link here. And we'll let it come up. And now we get to share that one. Publish that. Now we get to go over here to all of my posts. I know it's sort of like life narration, right? But I feel like it is important that I get these things done, and otherwise it would be just dead air. And The only thing dead around here are the spirits. And they're not even that dead. Newsfeed. There. Now, we've done the social media. Hopefully that will garner a few more of us coming back in so that you know that we can come and join me here. I only see Axton in my chat so far. We've only got 6 people, but I'm going to start reading. Why not? Because it is a Tuesday night. You have joined me. If you are at home, you can have a nice glass of this fine vintage water that I'm drinking right here. That's a very fine vintage. Just came from the tap. I know, tap water. How gauche. Well, lovelies, I think that it is time that we continue in Chapter 5, The Sorrows of Satan. Chapter 5. The next morning, on rising, I learned that His Excellency, as Prince Ximenes was called by his own servants and the employees of the Grand, had gone out riding in the park, leaving me to breakfast alone. I therefore took that meal in the public room of the hotel, where I was waited upon with the utmost obsequiescence, in spite of my shabby clothes, which I was, of course, still compelled to wear, having no change. When would I be pleased to lunch? At what hour would I dine? Should my present apartment be retained? Or was it not satisfactory? Would I prefer a suite similar to that occupied by His Excellency? All these differential questions first astonished and then amused me. Some mysterious agency had evidently conveyed the rumor of my wealth among those best fitted to receive it. And here was the first result. In reply, I said my movements were uncertain. I should be able to give a definite instruction in the course of a few hours, and that in the meantime I retained my room. The breakfast over, I sallied forth to go to my lawyer's, and was just about to order a hansom when I saw my new friend coming back from his ride. He bestrode a magnificent chestnut mare whose wild eyes and strained, quivering limbs showed she was fresh from the hard gallop and was scarcely yet satisfied to be under close control. She curveted and danced among the carts and cabs in somewhat of a risky fashion, but she had her master in Ximenes, who, if he had looked handsome by night, looked still more so by day, with a slight color warming the natural pallor of his complexion, and his eyes sparkling with all the zest of exercise and enjoyment. I waited for his approach, as did also Amiel, who, as usual, timed his appearance in the hotel corridor in the exact accordance with the moment of his master's arrival. Ximenes smiled as he caught sight of me, touching his hat with the handle of his whip by way of salutation. "You slept late, Tempest," he said, as he dismounted and threw the reins to a groom who had cantered up after him. "Tomorrow you must come with me and John, what they call in fashionable slang parlance of liver brigade. Once upon a time, it was considered the height of indolency and low breeding to mention the liver or any other portion of one's internal machinery. But we have done with all that now, and we find a peculiar satisfaction in discoursing of disease and unsavory medical matters generally. And in the liver brigade, you see at a glance all those interesting fellows who have sold themselves to the devil for the sake of the flesh pots of Egypt. Men who eat till they are well nigh bursting, and then prance up and down on good horses, much too respectable beasts by the way to bear such bestial burdens, in the hope of getting out of their poisoned blood the evil they have themselves put in. They think me one of them, but I am not. He patted his mare, and the groom led her away, the foam of her hard ride still flecking her glossy chest and forelegs. "Why do you join in the procession, then?" I asked him, laughing and glancing at him with undisguised approval as I spoke, for he seemed more admirably built than ever in his well-fitting riding gear. "You're a fraud." "I am," he responded lightly. "And do you know I am not the only one in London?" "Where are you off to?" "To those lawyers who wrote to me last night. Bentham and Ellis is the name of the firm. The sooner I interview them, the better." "Don't you think so?" "Yes. Better see here." And he drew me aside. "You must have some ready cash. It doesn't look well to apply at once for advances, and there is really no necessity to explain to these legal men that you were on the verge of starvation when their letter arrived. Take this pocketbook. Remember, you promised to let me to be your banker, and go on your way. You might go to some well-reputed tailor and get some properly rigged out tatar." He moved off at a rapid pace. I hurried after him, touched to the quick by his kindness. "But wait, I say, Lucio," and I called him thus by his familiar name for the first time. He stopped at once and stood quite still. "Well?" he said, regarding me with an attentive smile. "You don't give me time to speak," I answered in a low voice, for we were standing in one of the public corridors of the hotel. "The fact is, I have some money, or rather I can get it directly. Carrington sent me a draft for £50 in this letter. I forgot to tell you about it. He is very good. It was very good of him to lend it to me. You had better have it as a security for this pocketbook. By the by, how much is there inside it?" "500 in banknotes of 10s and 20s, he responded with business-like brevity. "500? My dear fellow, I don't want all that. It's too much." "Better have too much than too little nowadays," he reported with a laugh. "My dear Tempest, don't make such a business of it. £500 is really nothing. You can spend it all on dressing case, for example. Better send back John Carrington's draft. I don't think much of his generosity, considering that he came into a mine worth £100,000 sterling a few days before I left Australia." I heard this with great surprise, and, I must admit, with a slight feeling of resentment too. The frank and generous character of my old chum, Buffles, seemed to darken suddenly in my eyes. Why could he not have told me of his good fortune in his letter? Was he afraid I might trouble him for further loans? I suppose my looks expressed my thoughts for Jimenez, who had observed me intensely. Presently added, "Did he not tell you of his luck? That was not very friendly of him. But as I remarked last night, money often soils a man." "Oh, I dare say he meant no slight by the omission," I said hurriedly, forcing a smile. "No doubt he will make it the subject of his next letter. Now, as to the 500. "Keep it, man, keep it," he interposed impatiently. "What do you talk about security for? Haven't I got you as security?" I laughed. "Well, I'm fairly reliable now," I said, "and I'm not going to run away." "From me?" he queried with a half-cold, half-kind glance. "No, I fancy not." He waved his hand lightly and left me, and I, putting the leather case of notes in my inner breast pocket, hailed a hansom and was driven off rapidly to Bashingall Street, where my solicitors awaited me. Arrived at my destination, I sent up my name and was received at once with the utmost respect by two small chips of men in rusty black who represented the firm. At my request, they sent down their clerk to pay and dismiss my cab, while I, opening Lucio's pocketbook, asked them to change me a £10 note into gold and silver, which they did with ready goodwill. Then we went into business together. My deceased relative, whom I had never seen as far as I myself remembered, but who had seen me as a motherless baby in my nurse's arms, and left me everything he possessed unconditionally, including several rare collections of pictures, jewels, and curios. His will was so concisely and clearly worded that there were no possibilities of any legal hair splitting over it. And I was informed that in a week or 10 days at most, everything would be in order and at my sole disposition. "You're a very fortunate man, Mr. Tempest," said senior partner Mr. Bentham, as he folded up the last of the papers we had been looking through and put it by. "At your age, this princely inheritance may be either the great boon to you or a great curse. One never knows. The possession of such enormous wealth involves great responsibilities." I was amused at what I considered the impertinence of this mere servant of the law in presuming to moralize on my luck. "Many people would be glad to accept such responsibilities and change places with me," I said with a flippant air. "You, yourself, for example?" I knew this remark was not in good taste, but I made it wilfully, feeling that he had no business to preach to me, as it were, on the responsibilities of wealth. He took no offense, however. He merely gave me the observant side glance like that of some meditative crow. "No, Mr. Tempest, no," he said dryly. "I do not think I should at all be disposed to change places with you. I feel very well satisfied as I am. My brain is my bank and brings me in quite sufficient interest to live upon, which is all that I desire. To be comfortable and pay one's way honestly is enough for me. I have never envied the wealthy." Mr. Bentham is a philosopher," interposed his partner, Mr. Ellis, smiling. "In our profession, Mr. Tempest, we see so many ups and downs of life that in watching the variable fortunes of our clients, we ourselves learn the lesson of content." "Ah, it is a lesson that I have never mastered till now," I responded merrily. "But at the present moment I confess myself satisfied." They each gave me a formal little bow, and Mr. Bentham shook hands. "Business being concluded, allow me to congratulate you," he said politely. "Of course, if you should wish at any time to entrust your legal affairs to other hands, my partner and myself are perfectly willing to withdraw. Your deceased relative had the highest confidence in us." "As I have also, I assure you," I interrupted quickly. "Pray do me a favor to continue managing things for me as you did for my relative, and be assured of my gratitude in advance." Both little men bowed again, and this time Mr. Ellis shook hands. "We will do our best for you, Mr. Tempest. Shall we not, Bentham?" Bentham nodded gravely. "And now that you do say, shall we mention it, Bentham, or shall we not mention it?" "Perhaps," responded Bentham sententiously, "it would be as well to mention it." I glanced from one to the other, not understanding what they meant. Mr. Ellis rubbed his hands and smiled depreciatingly. Depreciatingly. "The fact is, Mr. Tempest, your deceased relative had one very curious idea. He was a shrewd man and a clever one, but he certainly had one very curious idea, and perhaps if he had followed it up to any extent, it might Yes, it might have landed him in a lunatic asylum and prevented his disposing of his extensive fortune in the very just and reasonable manner he has done so. Happily for himself and for you, he did not follow it up, and to the last he has retained his admirable business qualities and high sense of rectitude. But I do not think he ever quite disposed himself of that idea, did he, Bentham? Bentham gazed meditatively at the round black mark on the gas burner where it darkened the ceiling. I think not. No, I think not, he answered. I believe he was perfectly convinced of it. And what was that? I asked, getting impatient. Did he want to bring out some patent, a new notion of a flying machine, and get rid of his money in that way? No, 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 said Mr. Ellis, laughed a soft, pleasant little laugh over my suggestion. No, my dear sir, nothing purely mechanical or commercial captivated his imagination. He was yes, I think I must say too profoundly opposed to what is called progress in the world to aid it by any new invention or other means whatever. You see, it is a little awkward for me to explain to you what really seems to be the most absurd and fantastic notion. But to begin with, he never really knew how he made his money, did he, Bentham? Bentham shook his head and pursed his lips closely together. We had to take charge of large sums and advise as to investments and other matters, but it was not our business to inquire where the cash came from in the first place, was it, Bentham? Again, Bentham shook his head solemnly. We were entrusted with it, went on his partner, pressing the tips of his fingers together caressingly as he spoke. And we did our best to fulfill that trust with discretion and fidelity. And it is only after we had been for many years connected in the business that our client mentioned, his idea, a most erratic and extraordinary one, which was briefly this, that he had sold himself to the devil, and that his large fortune was one result of the bargain. I burst out laughing heartily. What a ridiculous notion, I exclaimed. Poor man, a weak spot in his brain somewhere evidently, or perhaps he used the expression as a mere figure of speech. No, I think not, responded Mr. Ellis half interrogatively, still caressing his fingers. I think our client did not use the phrase sold to the devil as a figure of speech merely, Mr. Bentham. I am positive he did not, said Bentham seriously. He spoke of the bargain as an actual and accomplished fact. I laughed again with trifle less boisterousness. Well, people have all sorts of fancies nowadays, I said. What with Blavatskianism, Bestianism, hypnotism, it's no wonder if some folks still have a faint credence in their silly old superstition of devil's existence. But thoroughly sensible man. Yes, interrupted Mr. Ellis. Your relative, Mr. Tempest, was thoroughly sensible man, and this, idea was the only fancy that ever appeared to have taken root in his eminently practical mind. Being only an idea, it seemed hardly worth mentioning, but perhaps it is well, Mr. Bentham, agreeing with me that we have mentioned it. It is a satisfaction and a relief to ourselves, said Mr. Bentham, to have had mentioned it. I smiled, and thanking them, rose to go. They bowed to me once more simultaneously, looking almost like twin brothers, so identically had their united practice of law impressed itself upon their features. Good day, Mr. Tempest, said Mr. Bentham. I need scarcely say that we shall serve you as we served our late client, to the best of our ability. And in matters where advice may be pleasant or profitable, we may possibly be to use to you. May we ask whether you require any cash advances immediately? No, thank you, I answered, feeling grateful to my friend Jimenez for having placed me in a perfectly independent position to confront these solicitors. I am amply provided for. They seemed, I fancied, a trifle surprised at this, but were too distracted to offer any remark. They wrote down my address at the Grand Hotel and sent their clerk to show me to the door. I gave this man half a sovereign to drink to my health, which he very cheerfully promised to do. Then I walked round by the law courts, trying to realize that I was not in a dizzy dream, but that I was actually and solidly 5 times a millionaire. As luck would have it, in turning a corner, I jostled up against a man coming the other way, the very publisher who had returned my rejected manuscript the day before. "Hello," he exclaimed, stopping short. "Hello," I rejoined. "Where are you off to?" he went on. "Going to try to place that unlucky novel?" "My dear boy, believe me, it will never do, as it's—" "It will do, it shall do," I said calmly. "I am going to publish it myself." He started. Publish it yourself? Good heavens. It will cost you 60 or 70, perhaps £100. "I don't care, it cost me 1,000. A red flush came into his face, and his eyes opened in astonishment. I thought... Excuse me, he stammered awkwardly. "I thought money was scarce with you." "It was," I answered dryly. "It isn't now." Then he was utterly bewildered. This utterly bewildered look, together with the whole topsy-turviness of things in my altered position, struck me so forcibly that I burst out laughing wildly and with a prolonged noise and violence that apparently alarmed him, for he began looking nervously about him in all directions, as if meditating flight. I caught him by the arm. "Look here, man. I'm not mad. Don't you think it? I'm only a millionaire." And I began laughing again. The situation seemed to be so sublimely ridiculous, but this worthy publisher did not see it all, and his features expressed so much genuine alarm that I made no further effort to control myself, and succeeded. "I assure you on my word of honor, I'm not joking. It's a fact. Last night I wanted a dinner, and you, like a good fellow, offered to give me one. Today I possess 5 millions of money. Don't stare so. Don't have a fit of apoplexy. And as I have told you, I shall publish my book myself at my own expense, and it shall succeed. Oh, I'm in earnest, grim as death. I've more than enough in my pocketbook to pay for the publication now." I loosed hold of him and fell back, stupefied and confused. He fell back, stupefied and confused. "God bless my soul," he muttered feebly. "It's like a dream. I was never more astonished in my life." "Nor I said, another temptation to laughter threatening my composure. "But strange things happen in life, as in fiction, and that book which the readers rejected, shall be the headstone of the corner, or the success of the season. What will you take to bring it out?" I bring out you, why not? If I offer you a chance to turn an honest penny, shall your paid pack of readers prevent your accepting it? Fie, there are not a slave. This is a free country. I know that the kind of people who read for you, the gaunt, unlovable spinster of 50, the dyspeptic bookworm who is a literary failure and can find nothing else to do but scrawl growling comments on the manuscript of a promising work. Why in heaven's name should you rely on such incompetent opinion? I'll pay you for the publication of my book at as stiff a price as you choose, and something over, for goodwill. And I guarantee you another thing, it shall not only make my name as an author, but yours as a publisher. I'll advertise royally, and I'll work the press. Everything in this world can be done for money. Stop, he interrupted. This is so sudden. You must let me think of it. You must give me time to consider. Take a day for your meditations, then, I said, but no longer. For if you don't say yes, I'll get another man, and he'll have big pickings instead of you. Be wise in time, my friend. Good day. He ran after me. Stay, look here. You're so strange, so wild, so erratic, you know. Your head seems quite turned. It is. The right way round this time. Dear me, he smiled benevolently. Why don't you give me a chance to congratulate you? I really do know. I congratulate you sincerely. And he shook me by the hand quite fervently. And as regards the book, I believe, there was really no fault found with it in the matter of literary style or quality. It was simply too transcendental and unlikely, therefore, to suit the public taste. The domestic inquiry line is what we find pays the best at present. But I will think about it. Will a letter find you? Where will a letter find you? The Grand Hotel, I responded, inwardly amused at his puzzled and anxious expression. I knew he was already mentally calculating how much he could make out of me in the pursuit of my literary whim. Come there and lunch, or dine with me tomorrow if you like. Only send me a word beforehand. Remember, I give you just a day's grace to decide. It must be yes or no, 24 hours. And with this, I left him, staring vaguely after me like a man who's seen some nameless wonder drop out of the sky at his feet. I went on laughing to myself inaudibly till I saw one or two passers-by look at me so surprisedly that I came to the conclusion that I must put on a disguise on my thoughts if I would not be taken for a madman. I resumed normal condition of the phlegmatic Englishman who considers it height of bad form to display any personal emotion whatsoever, and I occupied the rest of the morning in purchasing some ready-made apparel, which, by unusual good luck, happened to fit me, and also in giving an extensive, not to say extravagant order to a fashionable tailor in Sackville Street who promised me everything with punctuality and dispatch. I next sent off the rent I owed to the landlady of my former lodgings, adding £5 extra by way of recognition of the poor woman's long patience in giving me credit and general kindness towards me during my stay in her dismal house. And this done, I returned to the Grand in high spirits, looking and feeling very much the better for my ready-made outfit. A waiter met me at the corridor, and with the most obsequious deference, informed me that His Excellency, the Prince, was waiting luncheon for me in his own apartments, sumptuous drawing-room, standing near full light of the largest window, and holding in his hand an oblong crystal case through which he was looking with the almost affectionate solicitude. "Ah, Geoffrey, here you are," he exclaimed. "I imagined you would get through your business by lunchtime, so I waited." "Very good of you," I said, pleased at the friendly familiarity as he displayed in thus calling me by my Christian name. "What have you got there?" "A pet of mine," he answered, smiling slightly. "Did you ever see anything like it before?" Chapter 6. I approached and examined the box he held. It was perforated with finely drilled holes for the admission of air, and within it lay a brilliant winged insect colored with all the tints and half-tints of the rainbow. "Is it alive?" I asked. "It is alive, and has a sufficient share of intelligence," replied Jimenez. "I feed it, and it knows me. That is the utmost you can say of the most civilized human beings. They know what feeds them. It is quite tame and friendly, you perceive." And opening the case, he gently advanced his forefinger. Glittering Beetle's body palpitated with the hues of an opal, Its radiant wings expanded, and it rose at once to its protector's hand and clung there. He lifted it out and held it aloft, then shaking it to and fro lightly, he exclaimed, "Off, sprite, fly and return to me." The creature soared away through the room and round the ceiling, looking like a beautiful iridescent jewel, the whir of its wings making a faint buzzing sound as it flew. I watched it, fascinated, till after a few graceful movements hither and thither, it returned to its owner's still outstretched hand, and again settled there, making no further attempt to fly. There's a well-worn platitude which declares that in the midst of life we are in death, said the prince, then softly, bending his dark, deep eyes on the insect's quivering wings. But as a matter of fact, that maxim is wrong, as so many trite human maxims are. It should be, in the midst of death we are in life. This creature is a rare and curious production of death, but not, I believe, the only one of its kind. Others have been found under precisely similar circumstances. I took possession of this one myself in a rather weird fashion. Will the story bore you? On the contrary, I rejoined, eagerly, my eyes fixed on the radiant bat-shaped thing that had glittered in the light as though its veins were phosphorescent. He paused a moment, watching me. Well, it happened simply thus. I was present at the uncasing of an Egyptian female mummy. Her talismans described her as a princess of a famous royal house. Several curious jewels were tied round her neck, and on her chest was a piece of beaten gold, 1/4 of an inch thick. Underneath this gold plate, her body was swathed round and round in an unusual number of scented wrappings. And when these were removed, it was discovered that the mummified flesh between her breasts had decayed away, and in the hollow, or nest thus formed by the process of decomposition, this insect, I hold, was found alive, as brilliant in color as it is now. I could not repress a slight nervous shudder. Horrible, I said. I confess if I were you, I should not care to make a pet of such an uncanny object. I should kill it, I think. He kept his bright, intent gaze upon me. Why? He asked. I'm afraid, my dear Geoffrey, you are not disposed to study science. To kill the poor thing who managed to find life in the very bosom of death is a cruel suggestion, is it not? To me, this unclassified insect is a valuable proof, if I needed one, of the indestructibility of the germs of conscious existence. It has eyes and the sense of taste and smell, touch and hearing, and gained these together with its intelligence out of the dead flesh of a woman who lived and no doubt loved and sinned and suffered more than 4,000 years ago. He broke off, then suddenly added, all the same, I frankly admit to you that I believe that it to be an evil creature. I do indeed, but I like it nonetheless for that. In fact, I have a rather fantastic notion about it myself. I am inclined to accept the idea of transmigration of souls, and so I pleased my humor sometimes by thinking that perhaps the princess of the royal Egyptian house had a wicked, brilliant vampire soul, and that here it is. A cold thrill ran through me from head to foot at these words, and as I looked, the speaker standing opposite me in wintry light, dark and tall, with the wicked, brilliant vampire soul clinging to his hand. There seemed to me to be a sudden hideousness declared in his excessive personal beauty. It was conscious of vague terror, but I attributed it to the gruesome nature of the story, and determining to combat my sensations, I examined the weird insect more closely. As I did so, its bright, beady eyes sparkled. I thought vindictively, and I stepped back. I vexed with myself at the foolish fear of the thing which overpowered me. It's certainly remarkable, I murmured. No wonder you value it as a curiosity. Its eyes are quite distinct, almost intelligent, in fact. No doubt she had beautiful eyes, said Rimenez, smiling. She? Whom do you mean? The princess, of course, he answered, evidently amused. The dear dead lady, some of whose personality must be in this creature, seeing that it had nothing but her body to nourish itself upon. And here he replaced the creature in its crystal habitation with the utmost care. I suppose, I said slowly, you, in your pursuit of science, would infer from this that nothing actually perishes completely? Exactly, returned Rimenez emphatically. There, my dear Tempest, is the mischief, or the deity of things. Nothing can be entirely annihilated, not even a thought. I was silent, watching him while he put the glass case with its uncanny occupant away, out of sight. And for now, luncheon, he said gaily, passing his arm through mine. You look 20% better than when you went out this morning, Geoffrey. So I conclude your legal matters are disposed of satisfactorily? And what else have you done with yourself? Seated at a table with dark-faced Amiel in attendance, I related my morning's adventures, dwelling at length on my chance meeting with a publisher who had on the previous day refused my manuscript, and who now, I felt sure, would be only too glad to close with the offer I had made him. Rimenez listened attentively, smiling now and then. Of course, he said, when I had concluded, there is nothing in the least surprising in the conduct of the worthy man. In fact, I think he showed remarkable discretion and decency in not at once jumping at your proposition. His pleasant hypocrisy in retiring to think it over shows him to be a person of tact and foresight. Did you ever imagine that a human being or a human conscience existed that could not be bought? My good fellow, you can buy a king if you only give a long price enough, and the Pope will sell you a specially reserved seat in heaven if you will only hand him the cash down while he's on earth. Nothing is given free in this world, save the air and the sunshine. Everything else must be bought with blood, tears, and groans, occasionally, but oftenest with money. I fancy that Amiel, behind his master's chair, smiled darkly at this. At my instinctive dislike of the fellow kept me more or less reticent concerning my affairs till luncheon was over. I could not formulate to myself any substantial reason for my aversion to this confidential servant of the prince's. But to do what I would, the aversion remained and increased each time I saw his sullen and, as I thought, sneering features. Yet he was perfectly respectful and deferential. I could find no actual fault with him. Nevertheless, when at last he placed the coffee, cognac, and cigars on the table and noisily withdrew, I was conscious of that great relief and breathed more freely. As soon as we were alone, Jimenez lit a cigar and settled himself for a smoke, looking over at me with a personal interest and kindness which made his handsome face more than ever attractive. Now, let's talk, he said. I believe I am at present the best friend you have, and I certainly know the world better than you. What do you propose to make of your life? Or, in other words, how do you mean to begin spending your money? I laughed. Well, I shan't provide funds for the building of a church or the endowment of a hospital, I said. I shall not even start a free library, for these institutions, besides becoming centers for infectious disease, generally get presided over by a committee of local grocers who presume to consider themselves judge of literature. My dear Prince Ximenes, I mean to spend my money on my own pleasure, and I dare say I shall find plenty of ways to do it. Ximenes fanned away the smoke of the cigar with one hand, and his dark eyes shone with peculiarly vivid light through the pale, grey, floating haze. With your fortune, you could make hundreds of miserable people happy, he suggested. Thanks. I would rather be happy myself first, I answered gaily. I dare say I seem to you selfish. You are a philanthropic. I know I am not. He still regarded me steadily. You might help your fellow workers in literature, I interrupted him with a decided gesture. That I will never do, my friend. Though the heavens should crack, my fellow workers in literature have kicked me down at every opportunity and done their best to keep me from earning a bare livelihood. It is in my turn at kicking now, and I will show them this little mercy, as little help, as little sympathy as they have shown me. Revenge is sweet, he quoted sensuously. I should recommend you starting a high-class half-crown magazine. Why, can you ask? Just think of the ferocious satisfaction it would give. It would give you to receive the manuscripts of your literary enemies and reject them. To throw their letters into the waste paper basket and send them back to the poem stories, political articles, and whatnot, returned with thanks, or not, up to our mark type written on the backs thereof. To dig knives into your rivals through the medium of anonymous criticism, the howling joy of savage with 20 scalps at his belt would be the tame in comparison to it. I was an editor once myself, and I know. I laughed at his whimsical earnestness. I dare say you're right, I said. I can grasp the vengeful position thoroughly, but the management of magazine would be too much trouble for me, too much of a tie. Then don't manage it. Follow the example of all of the big editors and live out of the business altogether. But take the profits. You never see the real editor of the leading daily newspaper, you know. You can only interview the sub. The real man is according to the seasons of the year at Ascot in Scotland, at Newmarket, or wintering in Egypt. He is supposed to be responsible for everything in his journal, but he is generally the last person who knows anything about it. He relies on his staff, a very bad crutch at times, and when his staff are in a difficulty, they get out of it by saying they were unable to decide without the editor. Meanwhile, the editor is miles away, comfortably free from worry. You could bamboozle the public in that way if you liked. I could, but I shouldn't care to do so, I answered. If I had business, I would not neglect it. I believe in doing things thoroughly. So do I, responded Ximenes promptly. I'm very, very thorough-going fellow myself, and whatever my hand findeth to do, I do it with my might. Excuse me for quoting scripture. He smiled a little ironically, I thought, then resumed, well, in what at present does your idea of enjoying your heritage consist? In publishing my book, I answered. That very book I could get no one to accept, I tell you. I will make it the talk of London. Possibly you will, he said, looking at me through half-closed eyes and a cloud of smoke. London easily talks particularly on unsavory and questionable subjects. Therefore, as I have already hinted, if your book were a judicious mixture of Zola, Huysmans, and Baudelaire, or had for its heroine a modest maid who considered honorable marriage a degradation, it would be quite sure of success in these days in the new Sodom and Gomorrah. Here are Here, he suddenly sprang up, and flinging away his cigar, confronted me. Why do not the heavens rain fire on this accursed city? It's ripe for punishment. Full of abhorrent creatures not worth the torturing in hell, to which it is said liars and hypocrites are condemned. Tempest, if there is one human being more than any other that I utterly abhor, it is the type of man so common to the present time, the man who huddles his own loathy vices under a cloak of assumed broad-mindedness and virtue. Such an one will even defy the loss of chastity in woman by the name of purity, because he knows that it is by her moral and physical ruin alone that he can gratify his brutal lusts. Rather than be such sanctimonious coward, I would openly proclaim myself vile. This is because yours is a noble nature, I said. You are an exception to the rule. An exception? I? And he laughed bitterly. Yes, you are right. I am an exception among men, perhaps, but I am one of the beasts in honesty. The lion does not assume the manners of the dove. The loudly announces his own ferocity. The very cobra, stealthy through its movements, envices its meaning by a warning hiss or a rattle. The hungry wolf's bay is heard far down the wind, intimidating the hurrying traveler among the wastes of snow. But man gives no clue to his intent, more malignant than the lion, more treacherous than the snake, more greedy than the wolf. He takes his fellow man's hand and pretend friendship, and an hour later defames his character behind his back. With a smiling face, he hides a false and selfish heart. Flinging his pygmy mockery at the riddle of the universe, he stands bibbing at God, feebly astraddle on his own earth grave. Heavens! Here he stopped short with passionate gesture. What should the eternities do with such a thankless blind worm as he? His voice rang out with singular emphasis. His eyes glowed with fiery ardor. Startled by his impressive manner, I let my cigar die out and stared at him in mute amazement. What an inspired countenance, what an imposing figure, how sovereignly supreme and almost godlike in his looks he seemed at the moment. And yet, there was something terrifying in his attitude of protest and defiance. He caught my wondering glance. The glow of passion faded from his face. He laughed and shrugged his shoulders. I think I was born to be an actor, he said, carelessly. Let the clock go. I think I was born to be an actor, he said carelessly. Now and then, the love of declamation masters me. Then I speak as prime ministers and men in parliament speak to suit the humor of the hour, and without meaning a single word I say. I cannot accept that statement, I answered, smiling to him a little. You do mean what you say, though I fancy you are rather a creature of impulse. Do you really? He exclaimed. How wise of you, good Geoffrey Tempest. How very wise of you. But you are wrong. There never was a being created who was less impulsive or more charged with set purpose than I. Believe me or not, as you like. Belief is a sentiment that cannot be forced. If I told you that I am a dangerous companion, that I like evil things better than good, that I am not a safe guide for any man, what would you think? I should not think you were whimsically fond of underestimating your own qualities, I said, relighting my cigar and feeling somewhat amused by his earnestness. And I should like you just as well as I do now, perhaps better. though that would be difficult. At these words, he seated himself, bending his steadfast dark eyes upon me. Tempest, you follow the fashion of the prettiest women about town. They always like the great scoundrels. But you are not a scoundrel, I rejoined, smoking peacefully. No, I'm not a scoundrel, but there's a good deal of the devil in me. All the better, I said, stretching myself out in my chair with lazy comfort. I hope there's something in him in me, too. Do you believe in him? Asked Jimenez, smiling. The devil? Of course not. He is very fascinating, legendary personage, continued the prince, lighting another cigar and beginning to puff at it slowly. And he is the subject of many a fine story. Picture his fall from heaven. Lucifer, son of the morning. What a title, and what a birthright. To be born the morning implies to be the creature formed of translucent light, undullified with all the warm rose of a million orbs, of the first orbs of day coloring his bright essence, and all the luster of fiery planets flaming in his eyes. Splendid and supreme, at the right hand of deity itself he stood, his majestic archangel, and before his unwearied vision rolled the grandest creative splendors of God, thoughts, and dreams. All at once, he perceived in the vista of embryonic things a new, small world, and on it being forming itself slowly, as it were, into the angelic likeness, a being weak yet strong, sublime yet foolish, a strange paradox, destined to work its way through all the phases of life till, imbibing the very breath of soul of the Creator, it should touch conscious immortality, eternal joy. Then Lucifer, full of wrath, turned on the master of the spheres and flung forth his reckless defiance, crying aloud, "Wilt thou make this slight poor creature an angel, even as I? I do protest against thee and condemn. Lo, if thou makest man in our image, I will destroy him utterly, as unfit to share with me the splendors of thy wisdom, the glory of thy love." And the voice supreme, in accents terrible and beautiful, replied, "Lucifer, son of the morning, full well dost thou know that never can an idle or wasted word be spoken before me. For free will is the gift of the immortals. Therefore, what thou sayest, thou must needs do. Fall, proud spirit, from thy high estate, thou and thy companions with thee, and return no more till man himself redeem thee. Each human soul that yields unto thy tempting shall be a new barrier set between thee and heaven. Each one of its own choice doth repel and overcome thee, shall lift thee nearer thy lost home. When the world rejects thee, I will pardon and again receive thee, but not until then." I never heard exactly that version of the legend before, I said. The idea that man should redeem the devil is quite new to me. Is it? And he looked at me fixedly. Well, it is one form of the story, and by no means the most unpoetical, poor Lucifer. His punishment is, of course, eternal, and the distance between himself and heaven must be rapidly increasing every day. For man will never assist him to retrieve his error. Man will reject God fast enough and gladly enough, but never the devil. Judge then how, under the peculiar circumstances of his doom, this Lucifer, son of the morning, Satan, or whatever else he is called, must hate humanity. I smiled. Well, he has one remedy left to him, I observed. He need not tempt anybody. You forget. He is bound to keep his word according to the legend, said Jimenez. He swore before God that he would destroy man utterly. He must therefore fulfill that oath if he can. Angels, it would seem, may not swear before God, before the Eternal, without endeavoring at the least to fulfill their vows. Men swear in the name of God every day without the slightest intention of carrying out their promises. But it's all the veriest nonsense, I said, somewhat impatiently. All these old legends are rubbish. You tell the story well, and almost as if you believed in it. That is because you have the gift of speaking with eloquence. Nowadays, no one believes in either devils or angels. I, for example, do not even believe in the soul. I know you do not, he answered suavely, and your skepticism is very comfortable because it relieves you of all of personal responsibility. I envy you, for I regret to say I am compelled to believe in the soul. Compelled? I echoed. That is absurd. No one can compel you to accept a mere theory. He looked at me with a flitting smile that darkened the rather than lightened his face. True. Very true. There is no compelling force in the whole universe. Man is the supreme and independent creature, master of all he surveys, and owning no other dominion save his personal desire. True. I forgot. Let us avoid theology, please, and psychology also. Let us talk about the only subject that has any sense or interest in it, namely money. I perceive in your present plans are definite. You wish to publish a book that shall create a stir and make you famous. It seems a modest enough campaign. Have you no wider ambitions? There are several ways, you know, of getting talked about. Shall I enumerate them for your consideration? I laughed. Well, if you like. Well, in the first place, I should suggest that getting yourself properly paragraphed, it must be known to the press that you are an exceedingly rich man. There is an agency for the circulation of paragraphs. I dare say they'll do it sufficiently well for about 10 or 20 guineas. I opened my eyes a little at this. Oh, is that the way these things are done? My dear fellow, how else should they be done? He demanded somewhat impatiently. Do you think anything in the world is done without money? Are the poor, hard-working journalists, your brothers, your bosom friends, that they should lift you into public notice without getting something for their trouble? If you do not manage them properly in this way, they'll abuse you quite heartily and free of cost. That I can promise you. I know a literary agent, a very worthy man too, for 100 guineas down, will so ply the paragraph wheel that in a few weeks it shall seem to be the outside public that Geoffrey Tempest, the millionaire, is the only person worth talking about, and the only desirable creature whom to shake hands with is next in honor to meeting royalty itself. Secure him, I said indolently, and pay him 200 guineas. So shall the world hear of me. When you have been paragraphed thoroughly, went on Jimenez, the next move will be to dash into what is called swagger society. This must be done cautiously and by digress. You must be presented at the first levee of the season and later on. I will get you an invitation to some great lady's house where you will meet the Prince of Wales privately at dinner. If you can oblige or please His Royal Highness in any way, so much the better for you. He is at least the most popular among royal personages. So, it should not be difficult to you to make yourself agreeable. Following upon this event, you must purchase a fine country seat and have that fact paragraphed. Then you can rest and look round. Society will have taken you up and will find yourself in the swim. I laughed heartily, well entertained by his fluent discourse. I should not, he resumed, propose your putting yourself to the trouble of getting into Parliament. That is no longer necessary of the career of a gentleman, but I should strongly recommend your winning the Derby. I dare say you should. I answered mirthfully. It's an admirable suggestion, but not very easy to follow. If you wish to win the Derby, he rejoined quietly, you shall win it. I'll guarantee both horse and jockey. Something in his decisive tone impressed me, and I leaned forward to study his features more closely. Are you a worker of miracles? I asked him jestingly. Do you mean it? Try me, he responded. Shall I enter a horse for you? If it's not too late and you'd like to do so, I said. I leave it in your hands, but I must tell you frankly, I don't take much interest in racing matters. You will have to amend your tastes then, he replied. That is, if you want to make yourself agreeable to the English aristocracy. For they are interested in little else. No really great lady is without her betting book, though she may be deficient in her knowledge of spelling. You may make the biggest literary fervor of the season, and that will count as nothing among swagger people. But if you win the Derby, you will be really famous man. Personally speaking, I have a great deal to do with racing. In fact, I'm devoted to it. I'm always present at every great race. I never miss one. I always bet, and I never lose. And now, let me proceed with your social plan of action. After winning the Derby, you will enter for a yacht race at Cowes and allow the Prince of Wales to beat you just narrowly. Then you will give a grand dinner arranged by a perfect chef, and you will entertain His Royal Highness to the strains of Britannia Rules the Waves, which will serve as a pretty compliment. You will allude to the same well-worn song in a graceful speech, and the probable result of all this will be one, or perhaps two, royal invitations so far. So far, so good? With the heats of summer, you will go to Hamburg to drink the waters there, whether you require them or not. And in the autumn, you will assemble a shooting party at the country seat before mentioned, which you will have purchased, and invite royalty to join you in killing poor little partridges. Then your name in society may be considered as made, and you can marry whatever fair lady happens to be in the market. Thanks, much obliged. And I gave way to hearty laughter. Upon my word, Lucio, your program is perfect. It's lacking nothing. It is the orthodox round of social success, said Lucio with admirable gravity. Intellect and originality have nothing whatever to do with it. Only money is needed to perform it all. You forget my book, I interposed. I know there's something intellect in that, and its originality too. Surely that will give some extra lift up the heights of the fashionable light and leading. I doubt it, he answered. I very much doubt it. It will be perceived with a certain amount of favor, of course, as the production of a rich man amusing himself with the literature by way of whim. But as I told you before, genius seldom develops itself under the influence of wealth. Then again, swagger folks can never get it out of their fuddled heads that literature belongs to Grub Street. Great poets, great philosophers, great romanticists are always vaguely alluded to by swagger society as those sort of people. Those sort of people are so interesting, say the blue-blooded noodles, depreciatingly excusing themselves, as it were, for knowing that any numbers of the class literary. You can fancy a swagger, lady of Elizabeth's time, asking a friend, "Oh, do you mind, my dear, if I bring one Master William Shakespeare to see you? He writes plays and does something or other at the Globe Theatre. In fact, I'm afraid he acts a little. He's not very well off, poor man, but those sort of people are always amusing." Now you, my dear Tempest, are not a Shakespeare, but your millions will give you a better chance than he ever had in his lifetime, as you will not have to sue for your patronage, or practice a reverence for my lord or my lady, these exalted personages will be only too delighted to borrow money of you if you will lend it. I shall not lend it, I said. Nor give? Nor give. His keen eyes flashed approval. I'm very glad, he observed, that you are determined not to go about doing good, as canting humbugs say with your money. You are wise. Spend on yourself because your very act of spending cannot benefit others through various channels. Now I pursue a different course. I always help charities and put my name on the subscription lists, and I never fail to assist the clergy. I rather wonder at that, I remarked, especially as you tell me you are not a Christian. Yes. It does seem strange, doesn't it? He said with an extraordinary accent of what might be termed apologetic derision. But perhaps you don't look at it in the proper light. The clergy are doing their utmost best to destroy religion by cant, by hypocrisy, by sensuality, by shams of every description, and when they seek my help in this noble work, I give it freely. I laughed. You must have your joke, evidently, I said, throwing the end of my finished cigar into the fire. And I see you are fond of satirizing your own good actions. Hello, what's this? For that moment, Amiel entered, bearing a telegram for me on a silver salver. I opened it. It was from my friend, the publisher, and ran as follows. Accept book with pleasure. Send manuscript immediately. I showed this to Jimenez with kind of triumph. He smiled. Of course. What did you expect? Only the man should have worded his telegram differently. For I do not suppose he would accept the book with pleasure if he had to lay out his own cash upon it. Accept money for publishing book with pleasure should have been the true message of the wire. Well, what are you going to do? I shall see about this at once, I answered, feeling a thrill of satisfaction that at last the time of vengeance on a certain of my enemies was approaching. The book must be hurried through the press as quickly as possible, and I shall take particular pleasure in personally attending to all the details concerning it. For the rest of my plans, leave them to me, said Jimenez, laying his finely shaped white hand with a masterful pressure on my shoulder. Leave them to me, and be sure that before very long I shall have set you aloft like the bear who has successfully reached the bun on the top of a greased pole, a spectacle for the envy of men and the wonder of angels. Well, dear friends, that was quite a delicious interaction, now wasn't it? Oh, goodness. One could feel for Lucifer or Satan or any other name he may choose. If you enjoyed this, you may find me on Patreon under the Gentleman Psychic. If you enjoyed tonight's story and continue to enjoy it, you may find me on PayPal under Richard-Lael Lillard. rlillard6@gmail.com. And you can find it on PayPal. Venmo, Richard-Lael Lillard. It's Richard-Lael-Lillard. If you would like to book a reading, whether it be for a book or whether it be for your cards, I, with pleasure, would receive you. And you can find me at thegentlemanpsychic.com. With that, my dear friends, our time is long overdue, and I bid you a good night.